There it is, kids. The address, Malcolm Tent, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470, USA. As if social media weren't enough, that is your direct line to me, Malcolm Tent, your host every single week of Tent Talks Tunes, brought to you live on Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, on Facebook, and soon to be archived on my permanent record on YouTube. So if you're not here right now live on Facebook, you will be there via recorded technology on Facebook. Hello, Matt. Thanks for tuning in. Anybody who's seen this more than once or twice knows that I've been struggling with the camera for ever since I started doing Tent Talks Tunes. And I think I might have the solution here. My extremely cheap internet camera seems to work best if I stay right here, kind of in the center field. You can kind of see me, you can kind of see the background. RoboPuff Law, man, you've suffered through a lot with me with the cheap internet camera. You can read the address even from here. I think you can see it. It's there. I can get kind of close up without it ruining the focus too much. So we're going to keep experimenting with it. I did a little bit of research on what kind of camera I should get in order for flawless, crystal clear webcasting. And man, those things are expensive. There's no budget in the Tent Talks Tunes queue. There's no budget. I'll do this on my own. I do this for the fun of it and the love of it, and maybe I can occasionally sell some of my merch. If you look me up on Discogs and or eBay, TPOS, baby. TPOS, Trash American Style. That's where I'm found. But I have not sold nearly enough stuff on Discogs and or eBay to justify the purchase of like a $500 camera. I just don't have it. And my dearly beloved Genevieve Michaud has just chimed in and says it does what it should do, so no worries. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So yeah, man, I think you all were able to definitely read my mailing address, because I've been getting a lot of really cool stuff in the mail the past week. I'd like to go over that before we dig into today's topic. Excuse me. In no particular order, here's the latest issue of Ear of Corn magazine. Straight from Ohio. What's round on the ends and high in the middle? Oh-hi-oh. Ear of Corn. Food Fortunata is an alum of one of the most ridiculous bands that ever trod the boards. I refer to Sockeye and the many, many, many spin-offs of Sockeye. Food Fortunata is still at it with tons of utterly absurd musical projects, and Ear of Corn magazine. With a name like Ear of Corn, you know it's got to be yellow journalism. You can quote me on that. Hello, Andy Miller. Thanks for tuning in, man. And Marvin Haywood, good to see you guys. Yaw. What else came in the mail? Oh, man, my main dog, Brian Russell, sent me a whole care package of stuff. Brian is a true rock and roller, man. He sent me all kinds of stuff. He's got a band called State Militia that has a couple of really cool releases out. He's got a thing, Brian Russell and the Boilermakers, which is really cool. I like this one a lot. The Underworld Scum. Look at that. You can see that cover. I'll try to get in a little bit close. Oh, the reflections are terrible. That is a snake biting the bridge of a guy's nose. And not only that, it's a limited edition of 200, and I got number 3. I thrive on this stuff, man. I love limited editions and things like that. So this is all various brands of very tasty high-octane rock and roll. Floor 13. It's all high-octane rock and roll, and it's all different shades thereof. Brian Russell was the lead singer for Blitz for a while. If you don't know Blitz, you better find out. Very, very cool stuff. So thank you, Brian Russell, for sending me all of that. This is going to be a lot of stuff for me to listen to next time I make the drive down to Charlotte, North Carolina for recording duty with Anti-Scene, which should be happening at the end of February. The demos have been flying thick and fast between Charlotte and Danbury, and new something in the works, album, EP, I don't know, but it's happening. I've been laying down bass parts and sending them down to the headquarters in the Queen City. So I think it's safe to say that y'all can look forward to some new anti-scene product very, very soon. You now have something to look forward to and to live for. Check this out. On my last week's talk about why on earth anybody would have 14 copies of the same Devo album, which in my case was the first Devo album, my good friend Jade Jade, who's the author of this extremely authoritative and informative book, We Are Devo, a biography of my #1 all-time favorite band, saw some of the Steve Keen paintings of Are We Not Men, We Are Devo I had on my backdrop. And I had these 8x8-inch versions, and Jade had a bunch of 12x12-inch versions. So he did a little bit of art swap. I sent him a couple of my 8x8s. He sent me a few of his 12x12s. And here's one of the 12x12s by artist Steve Keen. I love this guy's stuff. I love Devo, and I love art. Speaking of art, check this out. That is a John Truby. Well, that one there it's a print. But I commissioned John Truby from the Ugly Janitors of America band, the guy who originated the best country western song ever recorded, A Blind Man's Penis. That is your homework and your duty right now. Well, actually, when I'm done talking, look up A Blind Man's Penis by John Truby. I guarantee satisfaction. If that song doesn't blow your mind, you haven't got a mind to be blown. But I commissioned John Truby because his artwork appeared on the inner sleeve of a Zoog's Rift album entitled Island of Living Puke. And I loved it so much that I wrote to John Truby and asked if he would do a piece of art for me. He said yes. This is not it. This is a teaser. And you people will be seeing the fine results of John Truby's artwork as commissioned by myself in the more or less near future. So that's something else to look forward to and to live for. And the final bit of mail I got, this is really cool. I actually bought this. I mail ordered this book entitled Old Times, Good Times, A Rock and Roll Story by Peter Wanson. This is a history of the New Hampshire, Vermont rock and roll scene in the 1970s. And I haven't read it yet, but this is a bit of research that I have to do, which directly relates to a reissue that I have cooked up on the fabulous TPOS label. I am reissuing a 45 RPM single by a very interesting New Hampshire 70s rock band called Malpractice. So if you want to look that up, Malpractice, 1970s New Hampshire rock, I am reissuing their 45 RPM single on TPOS. The test pressings have been approved. Waiting for the record to show up from the pressing plant. It's a pretty good record, and it's got a very interesting story behind it. And this is going to help me fill in the blanks with the story when I write the liner notes for the sleeve. So that's this week's mail. Thank you, everybody, for sending stuff. You know I'm happy to give you a shout out and maybe send you a little something in return. Display the wares, display the art. All because you were kind enough to send something right here to P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. Right, enough jive turkey. Let's dive into today's topic, which is 8-track tapes. Woo, 8-tracks. Woo! Johnny Thunders had a 1-track mind. I got an 8-track mind. Oh, yes. 8 tracks. What an arcane and wonderful format that is. As usual, the roots of this obsession go back to when I was a wee tiny tot in the wilderness, the vile suburbs of unincorporated northwest Dade County in Florida. In Florida, all of the extremely ugly prefab concrete block houses, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them have living room, dining room, bedrooms, bathroom, and quite often a Florida room. We call them Florida rooms. Other people might call them a rumpus room or a den. In Florida, it was a Florida room, an extra room on the house. to just do whatever. And I remember that a fixture of the Florida room of one of our neighbors when I was a little kid was the home entertainment center, which is a different sort of home entertainment center than what we have now. The home entertainment center back then focused on the stereo system. And the stereo system was a AM/FM radio, record player, 8-track modular system. It was a thing, had the AM/FM receiver with the 8-track player on the side, the record player built in on top, and a couple of speakers. It was a realistic brand AM/FM 8-track turntable setup. This is where we now take a moment in pause of memory of Radio Shack, which was one of the best stores ever. I used to live, love, and subscribe to the reality of Radio Shack when I was a kid. And all the great hi-fi stuff came from Radio Shack, including some of the other fixtures of the Florida room. Besides the AM/FM 8-track record player, there was also the psychedelic light box, which was this box. It was about the size of a speaker, you know, about yay big, with a translucent grill on the front with all these flashing, colorful lights on the inside that would flash and dance to the rhythm of the music. When you're playing your Steppenwolf album, you'd get a psychedelic light show in a box. I remember our neighbors had a couple of these things by the stereo. And he also had like a black light poster, you know, with a big black guy with an afro on it and a Jaguar. I thought that was pretty cool because you didn't see people like that in my lily white suburb when I was a kid. I thought that was, as they say in the biz, that was badass. And it was black light too. So I remember listening to Steppenwolf and Three Dog Night and Janis Joplin and all this stuff while the dancing psychedelic lights in the box flashed off and on, and the big black guy with the Jaguar was glowing in the black light, and the wood paneling was this eerie shade of purple from the black light. This was pretty cool stuff, man. This was very heady stuff for a young fellow growing up in the really hideous, ugly, all-white suburbs of unincorporated northwest Dade County. Man, it warped me. Warped me like a record. Turned my brain into a wad of chewed gum. And that's good. That's very good. Because as Sun Ra once said, or I'll paraphrase it. To paraphrase Sun Ra, we've already tried the normal, and the normal doesn't work. So it's time to try the abnormal. Think about that while I have a sip of Volta. I clearly remember Steppenwolf and Three Dog Night 8-tracks being played on this psychedelic home entertainment system. Which kind of begs the question, why would the neighbors be playing an 8-track at home? I mean, 8-tracks were designed specifically, originally they were designed for use in jet planes. The original 8-tracks were designed by Lear. The same Lear who designed the Lear jet also designed the Lear 8-track. So you could have a portable, cartridge-based tape system that would play in a jet plane with a minimum of work, minimum of fuss, and a maximum of reliability. So these things were designed for jet planes. And of course, eventually morphed into use in automobiles, which is where they really, you know, had their best expression and their best use. But of course, there ended up being some demand for home use as well. And so you had 8-tracks all over the place. It was just one of those things that was there, you know, an 8-track player, a record player, and an AM/FM stereo. So I guess that was it. You know, 8-tracks were more expensive than records. I remember they were always at least a dollar more expensive than records. And when you went to a record store, the selection of 8-tracks was never quite as good as the selection of albums, unless you went to a specialized tape store. And in Hialeah, we had a place, I think it was just called Tape World, or it was called Tapeville, or something along the lines of that. It was on 103rd Street in Hialeah, or 49th Street if you use the Hialeah numbering system, towards the eastern end of town, and it was nothing but 8-track tapes and even a few cassettes. And you walked in, it was just like 8-tracks everywhere, and that's where you could find the best bodacious selection of 8-tracks. I used to love that place. So we would go there occasionally to buy 8-tracks and maybe even a cassette every now and again. So I've always had this long-rooted, deep-seated love for 8-tracks. 8-tracks are cool, you know, especially when you were a little kid and you're of a smaller scale than an adult. You know, you're scaled down a little bit, everything's smaller. An 8-track fit very neatly into my youthful hands. And when you stuck an 8-track into the player, it made this great sound, chunk, and it would play. And as it played for a while, the Mylar tape would heat up and this really wonderful aroma would come out of it. And the music sounded good. It had this, you know, little bit of layer of tape hiss on it, which I've always liked. I love it. So it smelled good. It sounded good. It was just good. And it was easy for a little kid to use. You just shove it in, pull it out. No problem. My father would let me handle the 8-tracks. He wouldn't let me handle the albums because a little kid could drop a record or, you know, scrape the needle across the surface or, you know, hands too small to pick it up, whatever. So I wasn't allowed to handle the albums, but I was allowed to handle the 8-tracks. Probably a deep-seated psychological plus for my love of 8-tracks. It was positive reinforcement when I was a young lad. And a young lad needs all the positive reinforcement he can get, as do the lasses. So yeah, that's the beginning of it. And I never, ever stopped loving 8-tracks. All the way up to the point where I now make 8-tracks on my own label, which, as I've said a million times before, is TPOS. If you go onto Discogs and or eBay, you'll see quite a few of my 8-tracks listed for sale. Please buy them. I'm begging you, please buy them. I got to be able to afford a good fancy camera for all you people. So the more 8-tracks you buy, the better camera I can afford. How's that for quid pro quo? Just saying. But my own products aside, I love 8-tracks. 8-tracks are really cool in a lot of ways because when they were issued, you would find just all kinds of weird stuff to collect. 8-tracks, a lot of times, when they were issued, and I'm going to sort out my AV just a little bit here so I can get all organized for you people. A lot of times 8-tracks, for whatever reason, had different cover art than the LPs. I don't know why. They just did. I think one fine, fun example of that, and all you Beatles freaks and geeks are going to love this as much as I love it. We all know the Beatles Yesterday and Today. That's famous for the Butcher cover. Little and lesser known is the fact that the 8-track had its own unique cover variant. It's possible that this version appears on a cassette somewhere. I've never seen one. It's possible that it does, but I think that this version of the Yesterday and Today album cover appears only on 8-track. And there were mock-up sleeves made for the LP version of this because Capitol Records was in a real frenzy trying to replace the Butcher cover because, you know, it was negatively received, like universally, thumbs down from the consumers and record execs and rack jobbers, and anybody who wanted to sell a record in 1965 knew that they were not going to have much success selling an album cover with a bunch of bloody meat all over it. And if you wonder what I'm talking about, look it up. Look up Beatles Butcher cover, and you'll see maybe, and I use the superlative a lot. I know I say that a lot of things are the best ever, but the moment I say it, I believe it. Might change in a couple of minutes. Might have been different a few minutes ago. But right now, I'm going to go on record saying that the original Butcher cover for the Beatles' Yesterday and Today album is probably the best single album cover ever made. It is a very cool and like fascinating story behind it. So Capitol Records, in a dithers, in a tizzy, trying to find a replacement cover for the Butcher cover, came up with this one. It did not appear on LP except on a couple of unique proofs, but it did end up on the 8-track. Why and how? I don't know. That's record company machinations for you. And that kind of begs the question, did the regular trunk cover, as they call it, of Yesterday and Today, did the regular cover, as it appeared on LP, ever appear on 8-track? Internet research team, get on it. We want to know the answer. I want to know the answer. We want to know the answer. Now, we all know that one of the albums that completely warped my psyche when I was a young lad, and I've talked about this on prior episodes of Tent Talks Tunes, is, of course, the immortal, life-changing Sludge Feast live album by Grand Funk. I don't care if it's blurry or not. You need to see that title, Live Album by Grand Funk. That album, more than any other, was my gateway into rock and roll the way it should be played, which is hyper loud, hyper distorted, uber simple, and just ridiculous. Love it. The album cover to Grand Funk Live album was, there's a superlative again, one of the best album covers anywhere, but for some reason on the 8-track they had a completely different graphic. And if any of you people out there have the vinyl of this, you'll know that that's the poster that came with the album. Totally inscrutable reasoning. Why on earth would Capitol take the bonus poster for Live Album and make it the front cover of the 8-track? Weird. I don't get it. But it's fun. It's a collectible variation. It gives us something to look forward to and to put in our collections. My 8-track collection, by the way, is just over there, beyond reach, beyond sight. I'm not the type of dude who's got like thousands of 8-tracks, but I've got dozens of them. And they're all cool like this. And I'm just going to show you guys a random handful right here, right now, on Tent Talks Tunes. Dorian James says that cassettes were available. Is that in reference to the Butcher cover with the alternate... I'm sorry, the Beatles Yesterday and Today with the alternate cover? Please clarify. We need to know. This is something I really like an awful lot. And I'm not endorsing Capitol Records in any way, shape, or form. They're a major label. I don't like major labels. I could give a good goddamn if Capitol sank to the bottom of the ocean tomorrow and grew barnacles. But when they were, you know, a label in the 70s, a lot of their product caught my eye. It was just inevitable. So I'm going to talk about a lot of their stuff. Cassette on the alternate trunk cover. Thank you, Dorian, for the information on that. And this is a good example of how sleazy, cheesy, ridiculous, and stupid corporate mentality is. You know, when I was a kid, in the early 70s, late 60s, the absolute remnants of hippie culture was still very much in the air, and I wanted to be a hippie. I wanted long hair and fringes and peace signs. I really, really, really wanted to be a hippie. And in the early 70s, Capitol was still marketing to hippie culture, or whatever hippie culture morphed into. And they had a line of blank 8-tracks that you could record over. And they called it the Beautiful Line. And they were beautiful. They had pictures of fauna on them, including this one with a beautiful, beautiful hippie-style drawing celebrating the earth and ecology. Yes, I don't know if you can see it or make it out, but that is a potato. It's a potato in full bloom. It's got the hippie tentacles growing out of it. That's a potato, kids. And that's part of the beautiful line of blank 8-tracks. 8-track only. And what do I have tucked inside of this beautiful potato 8-track sleeve? I got something else. I've got something else that was quite unique for 8-tracks. The truck stop 8-track. Truck stop 8-tracks. And there were a few truck stop cassettes, and there were some 8-track style LP, truck stop style LPs. But by and large, if in the 60s and 70s and up into the 80s you walked into a truck stop or a gas station or a dime store or a mom and pop shop, you could very well find a big old rack full of 8-tracks for sale at a steeply discounted price. If the list price of a regular 8-track was, say, $6.98, these would be for sale for sometimes $2.98 or $1.98. They were cheap. They were inexpensive. And they all looked kind of like this. Hopefully you guys can see this. They look like that. It's blurry, but you can kind of see that is some real cheap typewritten graphics. You can see it says Led Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy. And on the back, more extremely cheap typewritten graphics. Somebody literally sat down with a typewriter and typed out those song titles and that title. And 999 times out of 1,000, rather than use the actual cover art of, let's say, Led Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy, they would use some kind of generic, just some kind of generic art. And Robopuff Law says, damn you, Clicky McClickerson. Is the audio feed clicking again this week? Somebody please tell me. Is it clicking now? Because I just may take this camera and smash it into little tiny bits live while you watch. But I'm also told that the camera only clicks when I do close-ups and zooms. So people tell me, do you get the clicking audio when I shove things into the camera lens? Because if that's what happens, I won't do it anymore. I want a pleasant audio experience. Okay, all right, this is weird. Robopuff Law hears clicks, but nobody else does. Interesting. Interesting. All right, I'll keep shoving the tapes in the lens and we'll let the chips fall where they might. Anyway, all right, now it's stopped. Whatever. Digital technology. Let's have a big salute for digital technology, shall you? Shall we? Shall all of us? Everybody, raise your hands with one finger for digital technology. Boo. All right. Anyway, typewritten, generic graphics. So you might wonder, what graphic do you put on a Led Zeppelin album? A beautiful black woman. Yep. And her necklace says, it says soul. That's what it says. It says soul. Man, is that 1970s or what? But yes, you put the soul woman on a typewritten truck stop version of Led Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy. And you can bet any amount of money you want that if you really dig into the 8-track world and the truck stop 8-tracks, you'll find this beautiful woman on probably 100 different 8-tracks. It doesn't matter what they were, whether it was Led Zeppelin, Curtis Mayfield, Harry Mancini, Henry Mancini, whoever. It didn't matter what kind of music it was. She's on it. And she might even be a real model that got paid 10 or 15 bucks to sit there and put a soul necklace on and be the cover star for every truck stop 8-track in the world sometime in the 1970s. That is unintentional art. My favorite kind of art. And on a similar note, we've got another really great one. This is another truck stop 8-track. This one has slightly higher production values. You can see that the spine actually has printed, like, typeset text, as does, the front. It's got typesetting. But once again, it's generic. You got to put something on the front. So what do you put on the front of an 8-track by this? Apparently it's a guy. His name is Arrow Smith. And you can see he's credited as Arrow Smith on the front as well. Well, I guess Afro is close to Arrow. Who knows? There might have been some kind of logic involved in that. So this wonderful truck stop 8-track has got an Afro cover for an Aerosmith album. This is why 8-tracks are cool. Cheesy, sleazy, unintentional art. Almost as good as cheesy, sleazy, intentional attempts at cashing in becoming art. Check this out. You like sleazy, cheesy, generic, ugly, hideous, unintentional art? Well, we're back to the typewriter. This is even more low budget than the Houses of the Holy One I showed you there a second ago. There it is on the spine. Look at that. That's the New York Dolls, kids. New York Dolls. And the front is beyond generic. You ain't got nothing on it. Just the titles. Typewritten and glued onto the front. That's it. You get what you pay for. If you went to the mom and pop discount store on the corner and wanted to buy an 8-track for $1.99 instead of $6.98, you'd get something like that. Of course, if you wanted to pay the full $6.98, you get something looking like that. And that's a real New York Dolls 8-track. Ooh. Get out the spittoons, kids. Start salivating. That is a genuine bona fide original New York Dolls 8-track. One of the proud cornerstones of my collection of punk rock and new wave 8-tracks. I got a bunch of these over there. I might drag a few out. But I think it's kind of interesting that this New York Dolls 8-track, if you look at it, this thing got a lot of play, man. It's like somebody was actually cruising around in their Trans Am or their custom party van playing New York Dolls. Look at all the wear on that. I mean, if you go to the flea market and see 8-tracks, you'll find that they are typically worn out like that. I mean, these things were made to be played. And they were usually in a car or a Learjet. And they got knocked around. But I'll bet you dollars to dog biscuits I can take this thing right now and pop it into my 8-track player, which is behind me, and it'll still play. Unlike the majority of, let's say, CDs from a few years ago that, well, they might play on this player, but it won't play on that player, or this laptop will read it, but that one doesn't have a CD reader. You know what? Screw that. This is an 8-track built to be played in an 8-track player. It's a minimum of 30 years old, and it still plays. Thank you very much. And it's the New York Dolls. Speaking of new wave and weird on 8-track, oh my God. It's the 70s. You've got your Trans Am or your Corvair or your Corvette or your custom-built party van or your Learjet. Or maybe you're at home with your home entertainment system in the Florida room with the black light poster and the black lights and the psychedelic light show and your 8-track player, and you go to Tape World in Hialeah and you want something to play on a Saturday night. You need a soundtrack for the party on Saturday night on 8-track. A soundtrack on 8-track for the party on Saturday night. And then something groovy that you can play while you're driving around in your Trans Am the next day, probably on the way to church and back. So you go to Tape World and you want to hear something new, you want something good to party. Like this. You'd walk in and just have them stacked up in racks. so you could see the spines. And in fact, at the fabled Specs Music at the Westland Mall, I've told you guys so much about, they had the wall of 8-tracks, and they were all displayed like this, and you can see the spines, and they were all behind a plexiglass series of doors that the store clerk could open up to do the restocking. If you wanted to look at an 8-track, you had to reach into a hole that was cut in the plexiglass, and the hole was just big enough to stick your hand in, so you could kind of grab the tape and sort of pull it out and look at it, but the hole was too small to pull the 8-track out of. So you could look at it through the plexiglass and either put it back if you didn't want it, or if you wanted it, you would drop it onto the ground where there was this conveyor belt. And so the clerk at the cash register would flick a switch, and the conveyor belt would transport the 8-track from where you were to the front counter. Pretty neat, huh? And I remember the conveyor belt was made out of, it was like canvas or something, and it said, drop 8-track here in magic marker periodically, so you would know what to do with it. So you'd reach in, grab it, look at it, drop it, and the magic belt would take it to the front where you could then go pay your $6.98. But in some places you couldn't do that. They were locked up, they were just on display by the spines, and you might look at the spine wanting to take a chance and not knowing who the artist was and feeling kind of adventurous and just want something to party with, and you say, ah, okay, this looks interesting, this might be good for the party. Look, I'll check this out. Nico, The End. Yes, Nico. Haha, see how durable they are? They can even survive me. Nico! As in the Velvet Underground and Nico. On 8-track. Let's see, what kind of party favorites does she have on there? It has not taken long. Innocent and vain. You forgot to answer. Secret Side. Valley of the Kings. Ah, Das Lied der Deutschen. And of course, The End. Yes, the song by the Doors as done by Nico in 1974. The End. Imagine the reaction this sucker got on Saturday night in the 8-track, or in the Corvette, or in the Corvair, or in the Learjet. You can see this one does not have nearly the amount of wear that the New York Dolls 8-track has. This one is, it's not very scuffed, it's not very beat up, it's pretty clean. It probably got played about 35 or 40 seconds before the young suburbanite from unincorporated Northwest Dade gave up on it, and luckily didn't throw it out the window. Because I remember too, when I was a kid, you'd see 8-tracks a lot on the side of the road, whether they had blown out or got thrown out or whatever, but you saw 8-tracks kind of the way you would see CDs on the side of the road for a long time. You'd see 8-tracks on the side of the road, you'd smashed to pieces or the tape pulled out or whatever. So luckily, this Nico 8-track did not get heaved out the window. Instead, it's here now in my collection. I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it. Oy. I hate Billy Joel. Or maybe I should... I've talked about this once before. I will begrudgingly admit now that I don't hate Billy Joel anymore. But for a very long time I hated Billy Joel. Hated him. But I always had this one in my collection, the Billy Joel Cold Spring Harbor 8-track. Because for a very long time this was a very, very rare album. Original pressings on the Family label were just tough, just about impossible to find. It was issued, deleted almost immediately. Billy Joel completely disowned it, and it was stuck in between record companies, and Billy Joel didn't want it out. So trying to find Cold Spring Harbor on LP was always very difficult. It had been counterfeited a bunch of times, but original genuine copies on Family, rarer than hen's teeth. And this is the only one I've ever seen on 8-track. And it's real. It's on Family. You can see the Family logo there in the corner. And, you know, it says Family on the side. It's got the cutout notch. It was deleted. So, yeah. Excessively rare. And as much as I detested Billy Joel for a really long time, I always kept this one just because it was such a neat artifact. A part of his career that had been kind of swept under the rug for a very long time. And on a format that's extremely arcane and hard to find. I love this stuff. Love it. Love it. And correct me if I'm wrong, this album, it has been reissued. It's definitely been reissued, but I believe in a fully remixed version. And once again, Internet Research Team, let me know if I'm right on that, but I'm pretty sure the version you can get now is a different mix, or at the very bare minimum, a completely different master than what they originally issued on LP and 8-track. Fascinating stuff. I love the fact that these things exist. Got a couple more for you people. When you talk about cover art and whatnot, and band covers, one of the most famous controversial covers of all time was Love It to Death by Alice Cooper, the third album by the Alice Cooper Group. The group, featuring a guy named Alice Cooper singing. Big difference from the solo artist. I've gone on and on and on about it. I'll stop now. But another one you can look up, since you've been researching the Beatles Butcher cover, look up the original Alice Cooper Love It to Death thumb cover. The thumb cover. That was on the market and very quickly withdrawn and very quickly airbrushed so as not to be offensive to anybody anywhere at any time. Because we all know that's the most important thing in the world. At least in the corporate mindset. The corporation will go out of its way not to offend anybody anywhere at any time, because that would hurt sales. And we must not ever hurt sales. And that's why the original cover of Love It to Death was pulled almost immediately and replaced with an airbrushed, not even PG, rated G cover. But what's interesting, and this gets back to that sort of disconnect between the art department and the graphics department in the LP division and the tape division, the 8-track version, and I know you're not going to be able to see this too clearly. We'll try it. You might be able to see that, as far as I know, and as far as what I'm told, neither the 8-track nor cassette version ever got changed. The thumb remained the same. The thumb remained the same. Because every copy of this I've ever seen on the different variants of 8-track, whether it's a yellow shell or a black shell, 70s pressing, early 80s printing, they all have the thumb. And all the cassettes I've seen, whether it's the Ampex plastic slip-in box or the Norelco box, they all have the thumb. Go figure. I guess maybe they thought that at that size, the thumb wasn't going to corrupt anybody or scare anybody or hurt sales. Because really, you really do kind of have to put in your, oh yeah, there's the thumb, all right, yeah, that's offensive, I guess. I don't know, I can't really tell. Fuck it, who cares? Just put it on the shelf with the Billy Joel 8-track, because Billy Joel's not offensive, therefore the Love It to Death with a thumb on it, which you need a magnifying glass to see, is not offensive. Maybe that's the way it works. I don't know. But I'm glad it did work that way, because it gives us more stuff to collect! Always need more stuff to collect. And just by random, just by pure random. I got one left to talk to you guys about, and this is a one of my favorites. This is a genuinely, not only is it genuinely cool, like everything I've just gone over, but this is a case where, in my opinion, the 8-track is better than the regular album. The 8-track is better than the album. The first 8-track player I ever got was actually in about 1970. Actually, I can tell you it was 1979 when I was in the 9th grade. And by 1979, 8-tracks were definitely on the way out. And the reason that I requested and received an 8-track player one year for my birthday was because when I was out prowling Specs Music and Woolworths and Woolco and J.C. Penney and the Treasury and Zayres and all the record departments in all the department stores everywhere, they all, almost to a one, had the big cutout bins. And I've talked about the cutout bins a lot. Whereas the regular full-price 8-tracks were behind plexiglass. You had to reach in and grab it through a hole and drop it on a conveyor belt. The cutouts were just dumped on a tabletop display, like in heaps. And they were whatever, 99 cents, $1.49, 49 cents. And god damn, you found the best stuff there. So my whole logic was, you're not going to believe this. I have an alarm going off in the next room. I better turn it off before it drives me crazy. Stare at the beautiful backdrops while I go turn this stupid thing off. Don't go away. Hold on. Can you hear it? Can you hear it? This is the sound that's driving me crazy. Listen to that. That'll drive anybody to distraction. That actually reminds me, I've only got a few minutes to go on this broadcast because I have an interview I have to do at 8 o'clock sharp, and it's 10 of. So I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly. So the reason that I wanted an 8-track player was because, yeah, why pay $6.98 for a copy of Trans-Europe Express by Kraftwerk when you can get the 8-track for whatever, $1.99? And that's, like, I really discovered an incredible amount of great music that way because the 8-tracks were readily available at a very cheap price. That's where I got Trans-Europe Express. That's where I got David Bowie, Stage. That's where I got Frank Zappa, Studio Tan. That's where I got Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band, Clear Spot. That's where I got the Beatles live at the Hollywood Bowl. That's where so many great albums came from. They were on 8-track in the discount bin. And this one is very near and dear to my heart because not only is it a European edition that has the European cover art, which is different than the American cover art, but as they did so often with 8-tracks, the track listing is ever so slightly different. They switched around the song running order just a little bit on the 8-track. And by cracky, the song order on the 8-track is far superior to the song order on the LP and the CD. It just flows so much better, and it makes so much more sense artistically and musically that I will always, always, always refer to this album when I want to go to listen to it in the order of songs as it appears on the 8-track. And it's just cool, this really unique shade of blue that they only used in Europe. It's just really neat. And it was a lot less expensive than the album was. And look at all the wear and tear on it. Somebody drove around in their Corvair and got plenty of use out of it. I don't know who, but they had very good taste. Love it. Love 8-tracks. 8-tracks rule. And what I just talked about here on today's episode is, I'm not joking, merely the tip of the iceberg. Maybe if I do another talk on 8 tracks, I can do nothing but my punk rock 8 tracks or really bizarre, like really bizarre. There are some very strange, unusual 8 tracks out there. And of course, an entire universe of super cheesy, super sleazy truck stop 8 tracks. If the people want it, I'll deliver it. If anybody wants to hear more about 8 tracks, leave a comment because I read all the comments and I like to converse with everybody as the days go by, whether it's here on Facebook or on my YouTube channel. Leave a comment, check in, message me, Malcolm Tent, and I'll do it. Because I can talk about any kind of music for pretty much as long as you want. And I really enjoy it. And I'm really glad to see you guys tuning in and commiserating with an old music freak and an old music geek like myself. It's nice to be able to do this. So, yep. Stay with me on Facebook. Go to my YouTube channel, Malcolm Tent. Subscribe to me. Check me out. Of course, go to Discogs and eBay, look up TPOS, look up Trash American Style. That's me. Maybe I'll be able to afford a good camera someday. Who knows? If not, it's good fun hanging out with you guys anyway. So I do hope to be back in about 167 hours' time. Until we meet again, this is Malcolm Tent saying so long from the Nutmeg State.